I'm an academic. This is my second career. The first one was I built and ran a company to make products out of advanced materials. My partners were MIT professors. The company has become quite successful, but I always had wanted to be a teacher. So as the company hit its stride and I was hitting age 40, with the support of a wonderful wife, decided if I was ever going to be a teacher, I better start. So I bailed out and became a doctoral student all over again at age 40 with 5 kids. It was stupid in retrospect. But I'm glad in some ways that I did it in this way, because I brought with me a set of questions that I wouldn't have thought about had I just stayed in academia for my whole life. And one of the puzzles was, gosh, if you look across the sweep of business history, most companies which at one point were widely regarded as unassailably successful, a decade or two later you find them in the middle of the pack and often at the bottom of the heap. And I knew a lot of the people who ran at one point successful companies whose companies met their demise. And it just didn't feel right to blame bad management for failure, because these are smart people. And so I've been studying this problem for now 20 years. What happens to successful companies? And it turns out that the root cause of much of the problem is good management. In other words, managers who do what we teach them to do at the Harvard Business School and places like us actually cause you to run your companies into oblivion. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. And most of it I want to talk about your businesses. There's a piece where I want to talk about what's going on in the overall economy, which I think is quite salient to some of the problems that you face in innovation. And as we do this, I think I'll get down off of the stage here because I'm 6'8", and if I'm up here, it exacerbates the problem. And I'd love to just break occasionally and ask you to throw comments or questions or cannonballs at me. So, since none of you have made a lot of steel yet in your lives, I thought I'd describe how this process of successful companies following good management and drive their companies over the cliff. I'd like to describe how this has happened in the steel industry, because there's a general model that has emerged from this piece of work. And then I'd like to talk about where else we see this is happening, including in yours. So historically, there are two ways to make steel. The dominant method was in what we called an integrated steel company that's in the upper left. Companies like Bethlehem and U.S. Steel. To build a new integrated steel mill would cost about $10 billion today. The other way to do it, as I describe in the lower right, is what we call a mini mill. Mini mills melt scrap in electric furnaces, and you could put easily 12 electric furnaces in this room. And because you can make molten steel in such a small chamber, they don't have to scale up the downstream processing steps, and that's why they call these things mini mills. The most important dimension of a mini mill is they can make steel of any given quality in their mini mill for 20% lower cost than you can make it in a big integrated mill. So just think about this for a minute. Imagine that you were the CEO of an integrated steel company somewhere in the world. You're making commodities. Here is a technology, mini mills, that would reduce the full cost of making this commodity by 20%. Don't you think you'd adopt this new technology? It's broadly available. And yet not a single integrated steel company anywhere in the world has yet built and operated a mini mill. And this is my sense for why something that makes consummate sense is actually impossible for smart people to do. So the steel mill, like every mill market, is comprised of tiers. So at the very bottom of the market is concrete reinforcing bar, or rebar. All of us could make rebar today if we wanted to. At the high end of the market is sheet that they use to make appliances and cars, a very complicated product. And the margins increase as you go up that market. At the time of this story, the integrated mills were making the full range of these products. When the mini mills became technologically viable in the late 1960s, the quality of the steel they could produce was really crummy because they were melting scrap in these electric furnaces. And the only market that would buy what the mini mills made was the rebar market down at the bottom, because there are almost no specifications for rebar to begin with. And then once you buried it inside of cement, you couldn't verify whether it had met spec or not. And so rebar was a perfect product for crummy products. As the mini mills attacked the rebar market, the integrated steel companies you show on the left was happy to get out of rebar, because it truly was a dog-eat-dog commodity. Their gross margins were only 7%. It made no sense to defend a crummy 7% business when in angle iron and thicker bar and rod, the margins were about 12%. So an interesting thing happened. As the integrated steel companies lopped off the lowest profit part of their product line, their gross margins improved by getting out of rebar. The mini mills, because they had a 20% cost advantage, they rolled tons of money by getting into the business that the integrated mills got out of. So they were really quite happy one with another. But in 1979, that pact disappeared. That was the year when the mini mills finally succeeded in driving the last high-cost integrated player out of the rebar market. If you look at what happened to the price of rebar in 1979, the price of rebar collapsed by 20%. It just turns out that there's a subtle fact about strategy that nobody had thought about before. And that is, a low-cost strategy only works when you have a high-cost competitor in your market. And as soon as they had fled up market, now you were just competing against commodity players with comparable prices. And very quickly, competition drove prices down to the point where the mini mills couldn't make money in rebar. So what are those poor suckers going to do? Well, they try to get more efficient making rebar, but that's just a recipe for survival. And then one of them looked up market and said, ladies and gentlemen, look at this. If we just make bigger and better steel, we'll make money again. And so they stretched their ability into the angle iron bar and rod markets. And as they attacked that market on the left, the integrated mills were just happy to get out of that business because it truly was a dog-eat-dog business. And why would anybody defend a crummy 12% business when up in structural I-beams and H-beams you could make 18% margins? So an interesting thing happened. As they lopped off the lowest profit part of their product line and added up the remaining numbers, their profitability improved by getting out. And the mini mills, because they had a 20% cost advantage again, their profitability improved by getting in. So they actually are quite happy with each other again until 1984. That was the year when the mini mills finally succeeded in driving the last high-cost integrated player out of angle iron bar and rod. You look at what happened to the prices of those products in 1984, collapsed by 20%. And the reward to the mini mills for their victory is they couldn't make any money. So what are those suckers going to do? They got to move up market. And as they attacked the smallest of the I-beams or H-beams, the integrated mills was, man, they were happy to get out of that business because it was such a dog-eat-dog. Have I told you this story before? But the same thing happened. As they got out, their profitability improved. Mini mills, as they got in, their profitability improved. They were happy with the result, both sides, until 1996. And that was the year when the mini mills finally succeeded in driving the last high integrated steel company, Bethlehem, out of the structural steel market. In 96, the beam business collapsed by 20%. And so what's Nucor, the biggest of the mini mills, going to do? They got to figure out how to make sheet in a mini mill context. And as they attacked the sheet steel market at the beginning, it was just commodity sheet. And the reaction of the integrated mills was they were just happy to get out of the commodity sheet because the margins in specialty steels are so much higher. So here we are. Today in America, the mini mills account for between 60 and 65% of the entire steel market. All but one of the integrated steel companies has gone bankrupt. You notice I was able to tell this whole story without using the words stupid manager once, because there's no stupidity involved. Every time the integrated steel companies got out, their profitability improved. And every time the mini mills got into the business that those guys got out of, their profitability improved. And if they had not kept moving up market, they would have not had a competitive advantage. And so it really is the pursuit of profit that caused these companies to do what they did. And a good way to visualize how this works is just imagine that you're a little boy and you want to kill a giant. How would you do it? Well, if you think that you can kill the giant on the integrated steel trajectory by introducing a better product that you could sell for better profits to the giant's best customers, the giant will just kill you. But if instead you come underneath them and define a fight where the giant is actually motivated to flee rather than fight you, that's the way a little giant kills it. That's how a little boy kills a giant. And we call this process the process of disruption. You know, when this kind of thing happens, somebody comes in with they can only do the simplest of the things. We're inclined in a static way, meaning at this point in time, they can't compete against us. But what you've described is there's a dynamic dimension to that. That is, those guys, you can never predict where the technology will come from that allows them to go up market. But what you can predict with perfect certainty is they're motivated to try. That's a great example. I don't know if any of you know this company called Toyota. Do you remember how Toyota came to America? They didn't come in with Lexuses. They came in the 1960s with these rusty little subcompacts called a Corona. And then they went from a Corona to Tercel, Corolla, Camry, Avalon, 4Runner, Sequoia, and then the Lexus. And General Motors and Ford were making big cars for big people on the integrated steel company trajectory. And General Motors and Ford would look down and see Toyota coming after him. And they'd say, you know, those guys, let's just go get those buggers. And they'd design and deploy a Chevette or a Pinto. But then they would compare the profitability of the little subcompact with the profitability of making even bigger SUVs and even bigger pickup trucks for even bigger people. And it just made no sense. And then step by step, Toyota just nailed Detroit to the wall. Who's killing Detroit, or who's killing Toyota? Toyota doesn't feel like they're being disrupted for Hyundai and Kia, the Koreans. And they've really stolen much of the low end of the market from Toyota, but it's not because Toyota is asleep. But just as why would they ever want to defend the least profitable part of their business when they have the privilege of competing against Mercedes? And then Chery comes from China next. And thank goodness we don't have to worry about those guys. Now, I want to, I guess, so that's just one thing I hope you remember from Clay's visit with you today, is if I should worry, what kills me are the folks at the bottom of the market. And they pick off the least profitable customers from me. And interestingly, the customers never, when they decide to do business with the provider at the low end, your customers, as they defect, they rarely call you up and say, you should just understand why I'm leaving. They just disappear. There's no signal from them. And all of the signal you get are the customers on top of you who demand even more. And so it's the signal is gurgled as you try to pursue profit. Now, the second idea I wanted to offer is a concept that only academic could invent, and that is competing against non-consumption. And what I mean by that is if there's a need in the market, there are actually a lot of people who don't take advantage of that offering because they don't have the money. And when somebody makes it affordable and accessible, then you compete against non-consumption. And in almost every case, non-consumption offers the greatest opportunity to grow. But you don't see it, and the way you keep the books don't cause you to look for non-consumption. So what I'm going to do here, this is very weak, but can you see I've got 3 concentric circles there? And they represent tiers in the market, where the people in the innermost circle are customers who have a lot of money. And then as you go to the larger circles, they represent customers who have less money and less skill, until you come to the largest one, the periphery of the market, where at least Clay has lived most of his life. And what I'm imposing in the circle in the middle is this model of disruption. The technology goes up faster than the customers can use it. And I'd like to describe how way back in our history, a set of companies that made consumer electronics products out of vacuum tubes got killed. And they were killed by the transistor. So those of you with a bit of gray hair will remember that up through the early 1970s, almost all consumer electronics products were made with vacuum tubes. And a vacuum tube was the size of a child's fist. And the televisions were a little bit bigger than this. And inside there would have been about 20 or 25 vacuum tubes. These things sucked up a lot of power and they emitted a lot of heat. In today's dollars, a TV cost over $3,000 US. And that meant in order to have it, you had to have a big bank account and a big home for this to fit on the floor somewhere. The transistor emerged from Bell Labs in the late 40s. It was disruptive because it couldn't handle the power required to be used in the products that existed, TVs and radios. All of the companies that made the vacuum tube products saw that the transistor was important, and so they took a license from Bell Labs, and they carried their license into their own laboratories and framed the problem as a technological problem. In other words, the transistor can't handle the power that's required for it to be used in the market. And as a group, these vacuum tube companies in today's dollars spent nearly $3 billion trying to make the transistor good enough that it could be used in the market. While they were working on that, other innovators decided that they would try to make products that are so much more affordable and accessible that whole new populations of people would have access to them. And so the first application was a hearing aid in 1951. And you actually couldn't make a hearing aid with vacuum tubes. Then in 1955, Sony introduced the first portable and transistor radio. It fit right in your pocket. It cost $2, and it was truly a crummy product. My brother and I bought one, and in order to get reception, we were raised in Salt Lake City, we had to stand and face west to the Great Salt Lake. It was a tinny sound, static-filled, but my brother and I loved that little radio because it was infinitely better than nothing, which was our other option, and allowed us to do something that previously was unthinkable, and that is we could listen to rock and roll out of the earshot of our parent, our children, our parents, who thought it was evil. And then in 1959, Sony introduced the world's first portable television. Again, it was a very limited product, but it sold for $99 instead of several million dollars. And a whole new population of people now had access to a television. And again, it was infinitely better than nothing, and so they were thrilled to have this limited product. So a booming new market emerged, competing against non-consumption, even while the core people, the vacuum tube company, continued to invest in the technology so that their customers could use vacuum tubes instead of they would use the transistor instead of the vacuum tube. And they felt no pain because these are all new customers that Sony and Panasonic were pulling into the market. But then by the mid-1960s, solid-state technology was good enough that you could start to build big products out of it. And within the next 8 years or so, the late 60s, early 70s, you just heard this big sucking sound as the customers were sucked out of the vacuum tube companies into this new arena of competition, and every one of the vacuum tube companies vaporized, like RCA and Zenith, General Electric, who were big players in that market. And it's not that they were stupid. The vacuum tube companies saw the technology long before Sony saw it. They spent 30 times more capital in the technology than Sony ever spent on the technology. But what they framed is that the market that they're serving is comprised of customers who buy. And they didn't think about, is there non-consumption of the products that they're offering, but they just can't have access to it because nobody has figured out how to make it affordable to them. And so I don't know your business well enough to know, might there be non-consumption? But I can imagine there would be, and so let me just give a couple of ideas in other industries, and then just have you think about it. So there's a technology called CT scanning, and the neat thing about CT scanning is that radiologists can look inside your body and catch things by happenstance. They see a growth coming in, and there's no symptom that it's there, and you're really lucky if they catch it. But these CT scans cost several $100,000 to operate, to buy, and you got to be a radiologist or a skilled technician to operate and evaluate this stuff. Wouldn't it be interesting if the cost of a CT scan, a simple one, cost $25,000 instead of $250,000? And it was so simple to operate that every personal care physician had one of these things in their office. And when you come there to get your annual checkup, the doctor historically, to figure out what's going on inside, they try to feel and listen, But much of what they miss because they can't walk inside, they can't look inside your body. And if you could just, the doctor could say, just lay down on this bed, and we're going to go, and to see if there's anything going on that we should worry about. There's enormous amounts of non-consumption of this technology. It's very safe. But nobody has figured out that they want to compete against non-consumption. But that's just a way to think about it in your business. This is happening at the Harvard Business School as we speak. It's a very expensive place to get educated about management, and we only allow 900 people in. And there was an enormous amount of non-consumption of learning about management. And what's happening to us is online learning, and corporate universities are booming, just booming, competing against non-consumption. And Harvard sits back in the blue space, feeling good about ourselves. And a booming new market is emerging right next to us. And we look out at that down our noses and say, it's not as good as Harvard. And that's the right answer to the wrong question. And the question is it getting better and better? And we're being disrupted by, right now, crummy, low-end, on-the-job learning that you're experiencing from me right now.
We work in a highly regulated, 50 different states have 50 different sets of rules in many of the products that we sell.
Yeah.
And that seems to tamp down some of the innovation, et cetera.
So I hate to tell you this, everybody thinks their business is different, and everybody thinks that regulation makes it very difficult. You've got to innovate inside the box. As a general rule, we innovate in the face of regulation by innovating outside the reach of the regulator. So, for example, you guys there are enough gray hair here to remember Regulation Q in the banking industry. This was a wonderful regulation, adopted in the Great Depression, and it made it illegal for a bank to pay interest on checking accounts. Isn't that a wonderful regulation for the banks? Oh, I would love to pay you interest, but they won't let me do it, you know. And so all kinds of people wanted to change the regulation, but it was so much in the interest of the banks not to change that it just couldn't change. And then in the late 70s, Merrill Lynch came up with this idea called the money market fund, and you could write a check on that and you could pay interest. And Merrill Lynch was outside the reach of the bank regulators. And then Fidelity did the same thing. And the customers then just evacuated the banks. And then the regulation had to change in an ex post realization that the world has changed. And almost always, when regulation is a barrier, some figured out how to innovate outside the reach. So thank goodness you're in your business and I'm in mine, because I just have to say things and you've got to do it. I'll come back to this in a second. So I want to get out of your industry for a second and just talk about something that's going on in our economy, which I think has some salience to how you do your work. And the puzzle here is that the U.S. economy has had 9 recessions since World War II. In 6 of the 9, the first 6 of the 9 recessions, employment had rebounded to the prior peak before the downturn. It took about 6 months for employment to turn around. But we had a recession in 1991-92 where it took our economy 15 months to get employment going up. And then we had a recession in 2001 and 2. It took our economy 39 months to turn unemployment around. And now we've been trying to turn around unemployment for about 67 months now. And we are nowhere near getting out of the recession. And there's just something fundamental has gone wrong in the national economy. And we're experiencing what people will call a jobless recovery. And we've been working on this, and this is what we're figuring out. There are 3 types of innovations. One type of innovation we're calling market-creating innovations on the left. And these are the things that we're talking about, innovations that make it affordable and accessible so that larger populations of people have access. Computers went through that. The personal computer enabled many more people to have a computer and use it. Model T was a market-creating innovation by making a car affordable and accessible. Let's see. Sustaining innovations are the second type. And sustaining innovations are the kind of things that the integrated steel companies were following. They make good products better. Market-creating innovations create jobs because by making it affordable and accessible, more people buy it, and therefore you have to hire more people to make it and sell it and distribute it and service it and so on. But sustaining innovations, which make good products better, they don't create jobs. Because by their very nature, if they convince me to buy their new product, I don't buy the old product. If Toyota convinces me to buy a Prius, I don't buy a Camry. And so sustaining innovations are very important in an industry, but they are replacative in character. And then the third type of innovation we call efficiency innovations. And efficiency innovations allow you to do more for less and sell the same products to the same customers cheaper. So Geico is an efficiency innovation. They can do it, over the net for 15% or so lower cost because of that business model. And efficiency innovations eliminate jobs. But efficiency innovations typically create capital because you're trying to do more with less. So they're always trying to get assets off the balance sheet to be able to sustain the business with less capital. So what's happened in America is we have in our midst a new church that emerged in the last 40 years or so. And we call a church of new finance. And we call finance a church because just like a real church, they have doctrines in this church. And they have high priests in the church. These happen to be business professors like me and partners in funds and so on. And we have commandments. And I want to just talk a bit about the impact that how we will measure success has had on our economy. So before the 1970s, the way we measured success was in whole numbers, or crude measures like tons of cash. But then the high priests decided that there ought to be more sophisticated ways to measure success because we want to really husband the use of capital and deploy capital only in situations where it can be leveraged the best. And we have to be very efficient in the way we use capital. And so rather than measure success in numbers, they offered measurements in ratios. And a ratio, as you know, is a fraction. There's a numerator and a denominator. And the great thing about a ratio is that it gives managers twice as many options for how to report success. So, for example, return on net assets, there's several cousins to that. If I want to get RONA up, I got two options. One is, I could be more innovative and generate more profit and put that in the numerator of the ratio. But what the heck? If innovation is just too hard, I just have to reduce the denominator of the fraction by outsourcing stuff and get assets off the balance sheet. Either one, RONA goes up, and I'm doing a good job. Or number 3, internal rate of return is a fraction. And if I want internal rate of return to go up, sure, I could be more innovative and put profit in the numerator. But what the heck? If innovation is hard, I just have the denominator is a measure of how quickly you get your money out after you put it in. And so why don't we just not invest in anything that pays off in the longer term? And if we only focus investments in short-term returns, then internal rate of return goes up. So it's really kind of a neat system, isn't it? I've got twice as many levers that I can pull to get the measures up.